Welcome back. Today's episode is going to be all about the threats that currently face freshwater mussels. Make sure that you watch the first episode so you have a good understanding of freshwater mussel biology so that all of this will make sense. In his book, North American Freshwater Mussels, published in 2012, Wendell Haag goes through the entire history of freshwater mussels here in the United States, starting with early collection and consumption by Native Americans and moving into a pearl boom in the late 1800s. This pearl boom transitioned into manufacturing of buttons by using the shells of freshwater mussels in the early 1900s. These two combined events saw the destruction of millions of freshwater mussels all over the United States, but particularly in the Midwest and Southeast. Now, the only reason that any mussels survived is that because once it was no longer profitable for freshwater mussels to be collected in a certain area, the men would move on to a different part of the stream or river system. This left fragmented populations throughout much of the United States, and those small, vulnerable populations still survive today in much smaller numbers. However, in the early 1920s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began building dams throughout much of the United States, and this severely impacted freshwater mussels. The building of dams, like the one you can see behind me, stop the flow of water. Without the flow of water, freshwater mussels are not able to obtain enough oxygen, get enough food, or reproduce properly. Besides that, in the late 1980s, there was an invasive zebra mussel that started invading the Midwest. Hebert et al. 1991 talks about the ways that freshwater mussels are impacted by invasive species like zebra mussels. They not only compete for the same food and other resources, but they also grow on the shells of native freshwater mussels and can impede their growth and ability to survive. Despite knowing all of these issues and things like pollution and other materials being introduced into waterways, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says that the passing of the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act did significantly reduce the amount of impact that chemicals and toxic spills had on freshwater mussels. Those are still issues, especially in those smaller, vulnerable populations. However, despite knowing all of this, there are numbers of freshwater mussels that are dying all over the United States and potentially all over the world, and no one knows why. In 2019, Nathan Rott, a reporter from National Public Radio, visited Southwest Virginia and some researchers who are trying to study and figure out why numbers of freshwater mussels are dying in higher numbers than the other animals living in the same systems. While this outlook can seem really bleak, there are conservation efforts underway, and our next episode is going to talk about some of those and some positive light we can shed on the plight of the freshwater mussel. I hope you'll join me.